When it comes to advanced renders like Arnold, they actually come with their own set of tools. So if you're going to work with Arnold, it has its own Arnold menu here that is going to contain tools specific to Arnold, including lights. If you were using V-Ray, you would have the exact same situation. It would have specific V-Ray lights, and same with RenderMan. So any sort of renderer comes with its own set of tools that are unique to it, that are designed in particular to function well with it. Now, what's nice about Arnold is since it's integrated into Maya, you kind of have tools that sit on both sides of the spectrum, I guess you could say. The default Maya tools work, with some exceptions, like I mentioned with ambient lighting, but the Arnold tools also work, so you can kind of interchange these. Something to be aware of, though, is that the Arnold tools are going to be primarily compatible with Arnold, which means they may not give the same results in, let's say, the viewport as would the Maya tools. So the Maya tools, they're designed to be a bit more compatible with the viewport than what we see with Arnold, and we'll experience that with some of these. So let's explore some of the lights inside of Arnold. I'm going to get rid of my directional light here. You'll see we just go back to darkness. You may want to pause your renderer. Sometimes when you're adding and removing lights, it does crash. So just be aware of that. If we come up here to Arnold and lights, you'll see there's several different lights we can add to the scene. Let's start with the first one here, which is an area light. Now, area lights are designed to simulate the diffuse box lights that are used quite often on film, as well as photography sets. So if you go ahead and add in an area light here, you'll see that it's a bit like a spotlight in that it goes in a direction here, but it's unique in that it covers an area. If you hit render, you'll see that you get a pretty sad result here. As a matter of fact, you might not even get any result here. And that's because when we're dealing with lights inside of Arnold, we're dealing with the physically based properties, one of which is going to be intensity. It's going to be the energy of the light. So in our attribute editor here, we can crank up the intensity here to, let's say, 100. And once we do that, you'll see that we get a result here inside of Arnold that we can see. So that's going to be with an intensity of 100. Now these area lights, they can be moved. So you'll see they're affected by position. They can also be rotated. And a unique factor of these area lights is they can also be scaled. So let's take a look at that. If you notice the shadow there, notice this has what could be called a soft shadow. It has this sort of feathering on the outside. If I go ahead and store a snapshot there, we can change the scale of the light here, and you'll see if I scale it down, meaning I make it smaller, that feathering goes away and we get a crisper light source. So you'll see the difference between those two. The scale property of an area light in Arnold is going to act as a diffuser. So when we talk about diffusers, that's the ability of lights to spread out, meaning that they bounce around more. And what that does is it removes shadows. So it gives us a soft shadow. So with these area lights, we can control hardness and softness of shadows, which is very useful. When it comes to lighting characters, for example, if we're doing a female character, generally female characters are lit with very soft shadows to the point where there aren't really any shadows at all. And this gives a very soft feeling to their skin and makes them look a bit more feminine and appealing. Whereas with males, especially villains or even heroes, a lot of the times you'll light them with hard lighting to create a large contrast and to make their features look more chiseled. So if you want to make someone look a bit more friendly and appealing, we can use the soft light. If you want to make them look a little bit more fierce, you can use hard lights when it comes to things like characters. Now, in general, though, this deals with lighting as a whole. So depending on the room you're in, if you observe the shadows in your room, maybe you have soft shadows. If any of you are studying at a school or somewhere that has those large panel lights like warehouses do, those lights have massive diffusers. So a lot of the times you end up with soft shadows. But if you just have kind of a light bulb hanging from your ceiling, that's kind of my setup, you'll notice that you have really hard shadows. And that's because there's nothing between the light and you. It's just striking you directly. It's not diffused. So if we scale this up, you'll see that we can actually get it very diffused to the point where those shadows kind of cease to exist. Notice we do run into an interesting issue there where it kind of creates a very defined line That's due to how close this is to the object and the angle that we have it at. But you'll see as we make that bigger and more spread out, that it is going to soften those. Another thing to be aware of is notice distance matters. This is something called decay, and we'll talk a bit more about that when we get into rendering more in depth. But decay is going to be one of those things that's on by default when you're dealing with these PBR renderers. And that basically means that the closer a light is to a source, the brighter it's going to be, the further, the darker. All right. All right. So that is going to be the area light. And we'll come back and we'll explore this. There's actually a lot of really cool things you can do with the area light, but the basics there is it's going to be a light that reacts to position, rotation, and scale, and it creates nice soft lights, and it's going to be designed to simulate those studio lights. Now, a lot of these we actually need partners to, so we'll explore that. But the next one's going to be the sky dome light. And the sky dome light is a replacement for something like ambient light. You'll notice that it's different than any light we've worked with before. This giant green thing here is the sky dome. All right. So what this is doing is it's adding in global light. It's adding in what we would consider ambient lighting. So if I come back into my character here, let me go ahead and get this focused on, you'll see that it gave us a bit of light everywhere. And this would be a better version of the ambient light we used previously. So if we go ahead and pair this with something like a directional light, and I scale this up so I can see it, rotate it, and let's just give this directional a bit more intensity, like 3, you can see that we can get this really nice sort of daytime look. In addition to that, I could give this a bit of color. So we could color this like we did previously. And then I could take my sky dome here and we could give it a bit of color. And you can see that we could simulate something like a sky. And now we get that nice soft lighting, and you can see how those are intermingling beautifully. All right. But the sky dome light actually can do a lot more than that. It can have textures mapped to it. So if we take a look at the sky dome light here, and we come into the file input, we can input all sorts of different types of files. In this particular case, let's just go ahead and use something called a ramp, which is in here by default inside of Maya. That way we don't need to bring anything external. So we'll take a look at our nodes here, and you'll see down here's ramp. Remember, if you can't find it, you can type ramp in up here to narrow that down. And you'll see that the ramp actually maps to this, and we can control the different gradients here. So below we'll have the ground, above we'll have the sky. Over here in the attribute editor, we can adjust this. So let's say I wanted this to be a dramatic sort of sunset. Well, the ground at sunset's usually pretty dark. I could maybe make it a dark sort of orange color. I think that's a good one. So dark orange being brown. And let's just say we move this up to be on the ground. I might turn off my renderer there so I don't crash this. But if I move this position, it will affect the lighting. Then we can think of what the horizon might look like during a sunset. So during a sunset, the horizon's going to be probably orange, maybe yellow even. So I might go ahead and add in just another little dot here to create orange. And you can just do that by clicking along here. That's all I did there. Maybe right before the orange, we're going to have yellow. That way we have a nice bright spot. And then as you recede into the sky, it's going to turn into a red color. I'm located in California, so I'm thinking of California sunset. Yours might be a bit different. After red, we'll get into the more magenta colors. And then finally, getting towards the tail end there, I might get towards the deeper blue sky. And we can see that gradient there coming together. And I can adjust the position of these to kind of change how near or far these are. And this will affect the overall lighting of the environment here in an interactive sort of manner. If we take a look at that little character now, you can see the crazy sort of lighting we're getting there. I could also get rid of my directional light at this point. I think we'll need to keep that there. Well, let's go ahead and maybe switch that to the orange color. And if I render this now, you can see the wild colors I'm getting in this render. And what's also cool, if I zoom around and move around here, you can see it also captures the sky. So if we wanted to use this as a background, we could. That's just one of the many ways we can use this. We can also pair this with something called an IBL, an image-based light, to actually create a set extension, and we'll explore that later on in the course. For now, we'll leave this here, allowing us to just create a basic gradient that we can control. But that's going to be the sky dome light. So it's going to be the light we use to kind of fill in the blanks to create that global sort of lighting, that skylight, if you will, that we were simulating originally with ambient lighting. All right, so the next one here is a mesh light, and mesh lights are lights that actually use objects. If you click mesh light, you'll notice that it has no transform selected. It's not going to do anything. So what we can do with a mesh light is, let's say I wanted a light that was a donut shape here, the fancy light that all the influencers have on YouTube. We'd go ahead and create our nice little donut here, maybe make it a bit bigger, freeze its transforms. And we could come up here to Arnold Lights and choose Mesh Light, and it will actually convert this into a light. So if I go ahead and hit play here, this will now be my light source. And this basically works like a point light, but it has a shape to it. So if I go ahead and increase the intensity here a lot, let's set that to 1,000, you'll see that this is now acting as a point light, but it has a specific shape to it. Now, why does the shape matter? There are different settings, as you can see here, we can change. If we check something like light visible, you'll see the light is now visible, and you can physically place this in a scene. So an advantage to mesh lights is if you actually need something like a visible light bulb or visible light source in the scene, you can check that light visible box there to actually make it appear and turn it into an entity that you can see, you can move, you can animate, and just have something that looks a bit more accurate. Now, one thing to notice is that the transform is offset from this. I suspect it might default it at 0, I'm not actually 100% sure why it's there. But remember, you can hit D to move the pivot, so we can still move the pivot on this. And you'll see that this does interact with scale, rotation, all that stuff. Notice that scale does impact the effect it has on the scene, similar to an area light. Okay, so that's going to be mesh lights, very useful when you actually have practical light sources in a scene, or you want to get specific shapes and things like reflections. All right, so let's go ahead and delete that. In addition to that, we have a photometric light. Photometric lights are very interesting. They use a photometric archive here, or I guess I should say profile, which you can download from various sources, and this hooks up to lights in the real world. So these are pretty common to see used in film, production. Other areas you're going to see these used is in things like architectural visualization, where you can actually source a specific light bulb from the real world and bring it into Maya using these profiles. So you can look up the photometric light profiles to find some. Unfortunately, Maya doesn't have any in here by default that I'm aware of, but there are websites you can get these on. Like I mentioned, it's used a lot in interior design. If you're doing things like architectural visualization, it's really useful to actually have real-world lights to see how it's going to illuminate a room. But they're also used a lot in film, especially when you're doing live action. So let's say you're doing something like Jurassic Park. You have, the velociraptors in a kitchen or inside of a building of some sort. And on that movie set, you know the type of light bulb that was in that kitchen. You can source that photometric code, find the profile, upload it into Maya, and have the exact same light. So that way it matches 1-to-1. You don't have to do as much adjustments in the post-processing portion to make it match. I don't really work with these much. I mainly work in games, so they don't have much use for me. When you're doing artistry in games, who needs reality? Okay, light portals. We're not going to be able to see light portals currently. This is for an interior sort of setup when light is coming through an orifice. So what do I mean by that? Light coming in through a window. So if you have ever looked through a camera when you're inside a room and looked out a window, you'll know that the camera kind of freaks out a little bit. And that's because the camera is trying to figure out which source of illumination to use. Cameras aren't quite as smart as human eyes. So what happens is we get a darker interior and a lighter exterior, or you get just kind of a glowing box as a window, and light portals let us simulate that. So we're not going to explore this here, but we might get into this in our final project. The last one is the physical sky. So this one is impressive at first glance. What it does is it creates a sky dome light that has a physical sky tied in. Now you'll notice one of the big differences here though is inside of Maya, it just looks like a big dark room. And that's because this is an Arnold specific light. So sky dome lights have some interaction with the viewport, as do area lights, as do mesh lights. But when we get into things like the physical sky, this is specifically going to be something you see used by the renderer. Now, this is actually a special shader at the end of the day, and that's what we see over here. It's the ability to control the different aspects of what's going on with this light. I tend not to use these. I prefer sky dome lights, but these can be useful. And you'll notice that there is a little sun up there, which is kind of fun. You do actually have that in here, and you can change different aspects like the sun size here to make the sun bigger. You can also change things like the elevation. And this is one of the really cool things is the elevation, as we change this, actually changes the time of day. So you'll see that we can actually do a sunset cycle, sunrise cycle with this, which can be really cool. So physical sky, fun to play with, but I tend to prefer the sky dome light just for a little bit more artistic control. But it's another really cool tool we have access to. And these are pretty standard in any sort of renderer you're going to be using when it comes to CPU. So V-Ray has version, Arnold has version, RenderMan has a version type thing. So they all have different physical skies. All right, so that's going to be the base rundown there on these. Now, I don't know if we can play around with the light portal at all. We could try something really quick here. I'm going to delete out that physical sky just because it's a little bit harder to control. Just throw a quick ramp onto here. Let's go ahead and do something like a directional light. That way we get an idea of how this is going to go. Maybe set this to 3. And I could try placing a light portal in here to see if it does anything. Chances are it won't. So we can grab a light portal here. It looks like it did. So you'll see what happens is the light portal is kind of choking the light from that direction. And if I move it here, I think we can kind of channel it a little bit there. You can see the effect it's having there on the ground. So you'll see that it's going to channel it through that sort of point there. It's going to concentrate it. And if you come into here, into the portal, there's really not too much going on. You know, it's more of a helper than it is a light. You can change things like the size, and you can see that affects how much light's going to be coming through that portal. Generally speaking, we adjust this to be the shape of whatever object this is coming through. So if it's coming through a window or a doorway, we would adjust that. But you can see it does that choking effect I was talking about where coming through the window is more concentrated and around everything else it's darker. So for those interior scenes, those light portals come in handy. Okay, now this is just the very basic stuff when it comes to lighting with render specific tools, but there's all sorts of other tools we're going to explore as we go throughout here, all sorts of different types of controls we can gain access to. But I wanted to show you those because we are going to utilize the sky dome light for this particular project, and we may introduce some of the other lights as we go. It is worth noting that they are compatible with the Maya lights still, so we can use both Arnold and Maya lights, which is really cool. But that's a base rundown on some of the new lights that we're gaining access to. So those are, once again, render-specific lights, which are going to be unique to Arnold and work specifically with Arnold. With that said, could you use these with another renderer like RenderMan? No. Okay, so they have compatibility with Maya, yes, so you can do it with Hardware 2.0, you can do it with Maya, but if you're to bring in something like RenderMan or V-Ray, the Arnold lights would actually do nothing, okay? So now that we've explored those a little bit, let's go ahead and take a look at the more advanced shaders that we gain access to with PBR. Before we do that, though, as a challenge, what I want you to do is go through each of the Arnold lights and just play around with them. Nothing really special here that you need to do. Just go ahead and fiddle with them, see how they affect your scene. And if you want to, you could even go back and relight your other scene, trying them out, okay? You might want to hold off on that till we get through this section, though, and talk about rendering. That way you would know how to render it if you wanted to do a sequence out of there, and also kind of what to expect in terms of render times. But give that a shot. Go ahead and mess around with those lights, get familiar with them. Try attaching a ramp to a skydome, since we're going to be doing that in this particular project, and just kind of see what you can create. All right. So with that said, let's dive into PBR materials next.